Well, what is this? Ah, the amateur marine biologist at Z. Let us watch and see the fruits of his struggle.
God, where are Victor graphics when you need them? Oh hi, I didn't see you there. You might remember the last time I was out here, I was face down in the water trying to pull off an elaborate Shark Week pitch. Needless to say, my idea didn't go through, but I'm not willing to give up on it just yet. I only need to rethink my approach, maybe familiarize myself with the subject a bit more. And you know, it was during that whole ordeal that I realized something. I live near the water, and where there's water, there's sharks. Real sharks, not fake virtual sharks that fly around on jetpacks, as awesome as that would be. So in an attempt to revitalize my idea, I've taken to the sea. In a boat this time and not in a shark costume with a bottle of beer. Well, I mean, I still have the beer, but I'm in a boat now, so it's fine. You know, there's just something you really gotta find fascinating about sharks. They're these hallmarks of evolution who've roamed this planet long before we have. And there's a reason for that. They're the perfect predator, beautiful in the terror they invoke. Which is why it only makes sense that one of my favorite movies happens to be about one. A movie that, ironically, I underestimated the first time I saw it. Allow me to draw you a picture. The year is 2016. I'm about 14 or 15 years old sitting at my computer when my dad barges in telling me he wants to take me to see Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Now despite the movie's theatrical run having come and went for a good 40-ish years at that point, I live near a theater that still liked to play it every now and again. And my dad thought it was about time that I saw it. My response, however, was a big no. I mean, I knew Jaws was supposedly a classic or whatever, but keep in mind, this is the mid-2010s we're talking about. If your movie didn't have big CGI action, or an over-reliance on jokes, or connection to another movie set in the same universe, then I'm not interested. Sad to say, but my mind was tainted by modern Hollywood. I didn't care if Jaws was some kind of cinematic landmark, it was old. I mean, Birth of a Nation was considered a landmark, but that movie came out like 100 years ago. I think that's why people don't like it. Now, despite what I said, my dad wasn't really asking and made me tag along anyway. We drove to the theater, got comfy, waited through a series of trailers that included the one for the Ghostbusters remake, the perfect thing to see before a movie like this, before finally Jaws came on. And the thing is, I was kind of right about it. There were no big CGI battles, there were no characters constantly joking around, there were no mid-credit scenes hinting at a larger franchise. Not that the movie really needed them. It was by all means the antithesis of everything I had come to like about movies at that point. So imagine my shock when I walked out of that theater having absolutely loved it. Jaws is hands down one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. And it's pretty fortunate I can say that because it could have been a disaster. Jaws has to have what might be the most infamous production in movie history. From vital props breaking down to actors fighting on set, to even just the many troubles that could arise from filming out in the open ocean. All of this led to delays, bad press, and even the production going millions over budget. Pretty much everyone was expecting Jaws to fail. And yet somehow, against all odds, it succeeded. In fact, no, it didn't just succeed, it fucking dominated. It was the first summer blockbuster. It made Spielberg a household name. It spawned a bunch of shitty sequels I haven't seen yet. And you know, since I'm already out here talking about it, and because it just so happens to be its 50th anniversary, which given its recent re-release I'm trusting that most of you watching this took the opportunity to go and see it because spoilers ahead, why don't I take a break from this to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies. Oh, and lucky me, they're doing a screening of it in the water nearby, so I pretty much have no excuse not to talk about it. Kinda weird they're showing it in broad daylight, but, you know, gotta make the reference look accurate somehow. As the opening credits roll, we hear a tune that I probably can't play for you here, but I can't imagine I exactly need to. I'm willing to bet that even if you haven't seen this movie, you've heard this music. It's iconic. Personally speaking, I didn't even know Jaws was a movie when I first heard it. I actually went most of my childhood thinking this was something Shark Tale came up with.
That song gives me the creeps.
What do you mean? It's our theme song.
I still can't believe Martin Scorsese was in that. I think we can all understand exactly what it's going for. This ominous thumping that gets louder and louder the longer it goes. It's as if John Williams was literally trying to recreate the sound of an approaching monster, which is pretty fitting for the kind of movie you're in for. We then cut above the water to a party on the beach, where this odd couple sneaks off for a midnight swim. The guy passes out drunk, leaving the girl, named Chrissy, to go out on her own. Suddenly we cut back underwater, the camera slowly closing in on her. Now you can't talk about Jaws without bringing up shots like these. As I alluded to already, the giant shark animatronic they built kept breaking down. Turns out massive electronics tested in freshwater tanks don't work as well when you drop them in circuit-destroying assault. Spielberg and crew were going to have to find a way to shoot without it, at least for a while. This led to a lot of scenes with the shark off camera whenever it showed up, either by focusing on the carnage above the water or by showing things from the shark's point of view. This might make it sound underwhelming when your movie poster looks like this, but on the contrary, it kind of benefited the film in the long run. Because you can't see the thing most of the time, your imagination ends up doing most of the work. The thing is only as terrifying as you make it out to be. Now, granted, it's probably fair to assume the average person knows what a shark looks like, assuming the poster, once again, didn't remind them already, but things like how big it is, how fast it is, or whether or not it's even there, all of that is still up to you to figure out. Of course, this isn't to say you never see the shark. They did get the thing working eventually, but it's still a while before it shows up in the movie. On that note too, for whatever reason using your imagination just isn't enough for you, there is at least that incentive to stick around just to get a good look at the thing. And boy, do you get a good look at it. More on that later. Anyway, Chrissy gets dragged under, this guy continues to be passed out, and then we cut to our main lead, Martin Brody, the new chief of police on the small island town of Amity. Now, Brody is someone I need to give you a clear idea of because he isn't the kind of guy you'd usually see as the main character. Not in a movie like this, anyway. Most people probably know Jaws for being a horror film, but I wouldn't say that's entirely the case. There are quite a few scenes here where it borders more on being an action thriller, which in most cases would require it star some larger-than-life badass who's so good at what they do that stakes might as well be an afterthought, seeing that there's just no way they could possibly screw anything up. I mean, hell, we even have that kind of guy going against giant sharks now. Now, obviously I'm exaggerating, usually these guys aren't just plowing through everything thrown at them with ease, but it does seem to be an unsung rule in action films that they mostly need to be fit for the job, which makes it pretty refreshing to see someone like Brody at the forefront. Brody, for all intents and purposes, is just a guy. He's a cop trying to escape the chaos of the city to settle down with his family. Unfortunately, that chaos finds its way back to him in the form of a shark that he's all too powerless to stop. He lacks the expertise to deal with this kind of threat and even has to partner up with others who much better know what they're doing. Hell, to really drive the point home, the guy's afraid of going in the water, something he doesn't even overcome by the end, believe it or not. I mean, he says he does, but I'm not entirely convinced that isn't just the high of seeing the shark go fucking kablooey. Even if that's not the case though, that is just the end we're talking about. Compare that to when you see him get on that boat halfway through the movie. A moment where by that point he should be more afraid of going in the water than he ever was before. He doesn't get involved because he had some quick therapy session beforehand, he's got a job to do. And that right there is the thing to take away from Brody. Despite his holdups, he isn't just gonna let the situation blow over. He's the chief of police after all, he's obligated to it, even if he might not be the most fit for this particular dilemma. And to me, that just rings home so much more than if he was someone who dealt with this kind of thing on a daily basis. Anyway, it's not long before Chrissy's remains are found, sending Brody on the warpath to close down the local beaches. The mayor, however, tells him off, not wanting to ward off any summer traffic, especially so close to the 4th of July. Probably should have let him do his thing though, because in the very next scene, the monster of the hour strikes again. This beach scene has to be one of those pivotal, suspenseful movie moments. It's an unassuming sunny day where everyone but our main lead is oblivious to the impending danger we all know is coming. We're not just sitting back till it happens either. We see people going in, we get fake outs of the shark attacking, there's a dog, I mean how can you not feel worried for the dog? Well, I mean there's the kid too, I guess, rest in peace, but what about the dog? There's this video I recommend called How Spielberg Creates Suspense on the Beach that goes over just this one scene. Far better than I possibly could. Everything from the camera work to the color coding to the influence it takes from other movies. The channel behind it, The Discarded Image, does an even deeper dive than that kid getting dragged down. Speaking of which, the shark takes the life of a young boy named Alex Kittner, sending the island on high alert. A bounty is put on the creature, getting the attention of local shark hunter Quinn, who says he'll get rid of the beast but for a much higher price. Little side note, just like the music, I've also seen this bit referenced long before I knew this movie existed.
You got a bathroom in this place?
In the back.
Thanks.
Now Quint doesn't really come into play until about halfway through the movie. Hell, you don't even see him again before then, save for this one shot of him on his boat. Like a giant animatronic shark they couldn't get working, this might make it sound like he's underutilized, but I think these days it's just another thing that ended up working in the film's favor. I've heard the opinion that Jaws doesn't live up to the hype because the story starts to dip, pun intended, when it reaches the halfway point. This is because a movie that for the first hour took place across many locations on both land and sea, suddenly takes place on this one boat for the second. I sort of agree with this. Like, it's jarring to say the least when 50% of your movie is set in one spot after the first 50% has characters going from place to place. There's just something about that doesn't really sound right. At the same time though, I really don't understand why this would ruin the movie for anyone. The second half has its own strengths that pretty well make up for this one drawback if you ask me. One obviously being the final showdown with the shark, can't go very wrong there, but I think even more so is that it's when Quint comes into the picture. I'm not gonna go over his character just yet, I think it only makes sense to do that when he actually comes into play, so all I'm gonna say for now is that he's without a doubt the most iconic character to come out of this movie besides the shark. Saving him for later really gives the second half an advantage over the first that still makes it worth watching. Not that it necessarily wouldn't have otherwise. Anyway, after Quinn is introduced, we cut to Brody at home trying to learn anything he can about the threat at large. And this, for some reason, is interspliced with a scene of these two strangers trying to catch the shark. Alright, so I have to admit, this scene here is one of the few flaws in the movie. The moment itself is fine, the dock collapses, this guy gets dragged out, he's this close to being shark chow, I mean, what's not to love? Well, the thing is, it's kind of pointless. We were never introduced to these guys beforehand, and we never see them again after. Or I guess, maybe they're somewhere back here, I mean, it is pretty dark. The incident itself also doesn't get brought up later, so it ultimately adds nothing to the plot. Even Chrissy and Alex, characters we only knew for like 2 minutes. Their deaths were inciting incidents that put people on alert. All this scene does is remind you that there's a shark in the movie. A movie whose poster, need I remind you, looks like this. I think the really ironic thing about all this is that the way it and the scene with Brody are interspliced implies they're both happening at the same time. This, along with the fact that Brody lives on a beach house near a couple of docks, could have been a setup for him to get involved. What if Brody heard what was going on from his house and went over to try and help? I mean, it probably still wouldn't have been necessary to the plot, but it would have at least made it involve someone we actually know. That isn't the case though, as they say out loud that Brody doesn't live on that part of the island. Like I said, there's nothing really wrong with the scene itself, even I had fun watching it the first time, but objectively speaking, it is unnecessary. On the bright side though, I'd say this is technically the lowest the film gets. So if at worst all it does is add a few minutes of padding, that should really tell you how good the rest of the movie is gonna be. Anyway, it's the next day at the harbor, and folks from all around have come to Amity to hunt the shark. Among them is one Matt Hooper, a marine biologist and shark expert hired to assess the threat. Hooper happens to be another character who's very different from the kind of guy you'd usually see in this role. He's the brainiac of the film, which in most cases would mark him as a nerdy comic relief. Someone who only really exists to make everyone else look cooler by comparison, like Charlie Day in Pacific Rim. Although come to think of it, they both seem to have a secret love for the giant monster.
I love sharks.
You love sharks.
Yeah, I love them. I love them.
Cause you groupie, he loves.
Shut up, Herman, I don't love them.
My point is, though, is that Hooper isn't that same awkward nerd. He lacks the ruggedness you would associate with someone like Quint later on, but is still a go-getter who knows how to take charge and isn't afraid to call people out on their bullshit. I said already that Quint is probably the most iconic character to come out of this movie, but personally speaking, Hooper is my favorite. There's just something you really got to appreciate about a character who would normally be a lesser person actually being on the same level as everyone else. Little side note while I'm talking about him, Richard Dreyfuss wasn't too all on board going into Jaws. The guy had a few years in the industry under his belt and saw Spielberg as too much of a newbie to be worth his time. On top of that, he didn't exactly like the idea of filming a movie out in the open ocean. I wonder why. He did eventually see some potential in the film, prompting him to sign on, but was quickly taken back again with how badly the production was going. Something he made no qualms to hide. There's this interview he did before Jaws came out where he basically let spill how much of a disaster it was, even going as far as to say that it would end up being a failure upon release. I was pretty shocked when I first found out he said that, cause for him to have what is a very petty outlook towards the film, Dreyfuss really gave it his all as Hooper.
Martin, there are all kinds of sharks in the waters, you know? Hammerheads, white tips, blues, makos.
I think that I am familiar with the fact that you are going to ignore this particular problem until it swims up and bites you on the ass. Now, this is not a boat accident.
It was a shark.
I mean, give the guy credit for keeping his priorities straight. Gotta make the best out of a bad situation, cause, hey, you never know when things might turn around. Now, despite being there to help, Hooper's usefulness is seemingly short-lived when something is caught just after he arrives. I mean, what are we, 30 minutes in? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they caught the thing already. Obviously, this isn't the shark that's been attacking people, but to a bunch of money-hungry fishermen and a mayor looking for any excuse to open his beaches back up, it might as well be. Some arguing ensues, prompted by the greatest line read of the word what in movie history.
Tiger shark. A what?
But it's cut short when Alex Kittner's mother shows up. This scene here really just reinforces that he's got a job to do mentality I talked about already, and it's kinda here where it actually comes into play. Brody knew about the shark from the beginning and has thus far done nothing about it. And while you can equally, if not more so, blame the mayor for shutting him down in the first place, you really can't blame Brody for feeling somewhat responsible for what's happened. Obeying your superior isn't exactly justified when people's lives are on the line, especially when those people show up to scold you for it. And despite how much this scene gets to Brody, his sulking is gonna have to wait because he's got a shark to help cut open. It's a tiger shark, which according to Hooper doesn't digest quickly, meaning that if it's the one that's been on the prowl, its last victim's remains should still be intact. As you can guess, they come up short, but this alone doesn't prove the actual shark isn't still on the loose, as Brody and Hooper head out to see what they can find. It's a fun little bit of trivia about this scene. You might be aware that Spielberg has a tradition of not directing the final shots of his movies. This began with Jaws when he found out that on the last day of filming, the crew were going to throw him in the water for letting the production go to shit. After finding this out, he showed up on set to get filming underway, right before hopping on a boat and leaving everyone to take it from there. The thing is though, after Jaws ended up being such a surprise hit, Spielberg kept this kind of thing up as a sort of good luck charm. It's one of the strangest tactics I've ever heard of a director having, and what makes it all the crazier is that nothing filmed that day was the last thing they shot for the movie. They shot the ending of the film itself, you know, with the shark exploding and the boat sinking and whatnot, but in terms of the production, the final shot is what you're about to see here. Brody and Hooper discover a wrecked boat, Hooper jumps in to check it out, he quickly discovers the shark was there after finding its tooth, and just when he's about to wrap things up, that's right, one of, if not the most famous scare of the entire movie was something Spielberg came up with at the last minute and was done in the editor's swimming pool. He even had to pay out of pocket to get it done because of how much bad water he was in with Universal. Thankfully, the editor's pool was full of good water, at least before they were done with it. Now, unless I'm misunderstanding Spielberg's tactic to refer to the last scene filmed during production, as opposed to the last scene of the movie specifically, in which case, sorry for wasting your time. There's just something so ironic about this that I can't help but point out. Oh yeah, and as for the scene itself, it's pretty great. It starts off unassuming enough with some lighthearted banter between Brody and Hooper, a little extra time to get to know the two. Right before throwing a wrecked boat at them is to say, guys, focus, there's a fucking shark on the loose. And the thing about that scare is that when I first saw Jaws in the theater, I could have sworn I caught this clip on TV sometime in the past. And yet despite that, I was still thrown back in my seat. That's how good of a scare this is. I mean, I guess it's also possible I left the room before it happened, but for the sake of raving about this movie, let's just assume it's the former. Now, despite their findings all but confirming there's still a killer shark on the loose, that still isn't enough to convince the mayor, who simply refuses to keep the beaches closed. For now, the most he'll allow them to do is keep an eye out for the thing for when the 4th of July comes rolling around. Now I'm gonna go off on a tangent for a second. You might remember at the beginning of the video I distinctly said I live by the water. This is actually true, it's not just something I made up for the bit. What I didn't tell you, however, is that I happen to live by this water. I feel like I've done this already.
Because I live there.
That's right, I grew up on the very island Jaws was filmed, Martha's Vineyard. Kinda makes it inexcusable it took me till my mid-teens to see it. Now you might think I'm here to brag about this, to which I say, you're correct, but can you really blame me? It's not every day you get to see so many familiar sights in a major blockbuster. And I don't think this is like someone from Manhattan seeing Times Square in a movie either. These are unknown, obscure places that most people probably have no idea even exist. For me, on the other hand, it's like going, hey, I know that theater. I'm sitting in it. You'd think I'm exaggerating, but some of these places were actually down the road from my theater when I first saw Jaws. Now, as much as I'm hyping this up, it also feels kind of weird seeing some of this stuff on the big screen. Jaws is now 50 years old, so a lot of the island has quite obviously changed since then. Like in this beach scene I'm about to get to, these tents do not exist anymore. Neither does this gazebo, or this beachfront arcade. Why'd they get rid of that? I would've loved that. It basically makes the first half of this movie an hour-long time capsule for the island. You know what's something to think about? If you want to do the Hollywood backlot tour at Universal Studios, you have to fly all the way to Los Angeles, or worse, live there, buy an expensive ticket to get into the park, wait in line for what might be hours on end, before finally getting to see some famous movie sets as you hope to God they aren't filming a reality prank show that day. Meanwhile, I, from the the day I was born, could freely roam around the filming location of one of the greatest movies of all time, and all it took was a short walk into town or a drive down to the beach. Although to the backlot's credit, it's not now forever associated with political conspiracies. Anyway, it's the 4th of July and the beaches are open once again. People hesitate to go swimming at first, but after a few brave souls try their luck, with a little nudge from the mayor of course, the water quickly fills up with everyone enjoying the day. Of course, we know this isn't gonna last. I think the best way to describe this scene is as a decent subversion of the beach scene from earlier. People are more on edge for obvious reasons, the whole place is being guarded from front to back, and we even get a longer fake out than the ones from before, keeping you more on edge before finally revealing it was just these two kids. Who were they? This also makes it easy for the actual shark to show up since all these guys are distracted. On that note too, the stakes are pretty up this time with it heading towards Brody's son instead of some kid he likely never met. It's a solid midpoint for the film, although there is one little part of it that kinda bothers me. And when I say little, I really do mean little. It's only on screen for like a couple of seconds, but man does it just rub me the wrong way. When the shark knocks over this guy here, we get this shot of it. And it's the clearest look you get of the thing up to that point. Sure, the view is pretty hazy because of the water, but you can definitely make out its head closing in. It falls in line with that idea of keeping the thing hidden that worked so well thus far. And since we're already halfway through the movie, it makes sense just to show a little bit more of it here. But then they maybe show a bit too much of it. Yeah, after a few seconds, the shark pops out of the water with half its face exposed. I think what really bothers me about this is that scene later where the shark suddenly jumps out at Brody. With how out of nowhere it is and him muttering that famous line,
"You're gonna need a bigger boat."
Wouldn't that have been a much more fitting moment to first see the shark? I know I'm blowing this out of proportion, but it just bothers me. So, with another attack unfolding for the island to see, the mayor admits he was in the wrong and signs a contract for Quint to kill the shark. Not long after do Brody and Hooper show up to recruit him. And at long last, I can talk about this guy. Quint is definitely the most abnormal character of the movie. This gruff eccentric who sticks out like a sore thumb from the rest of the island folk, all with a thick Irish New England accent to boot. Speaking of which, it might be a good idea to watch Jaws with subtitles because some of the stuff Quint says is just unintelligible.
Can't get a good man these days under 60.
He's a character who works best when you stick him with two relatively normal people like Brody and Hooper. On top of that, the way he interacts with them is very different between the two. Firstly, there's Quint with Brody. A very neutral dynamic all things considered. Simply put, they're pretty much just two guys who happen to be working together going forward. We do get a hint of Quint having to show Brody the ropes while they're out at sea, but aside from that, there isn't really much to go over. This dynamic on its own isn't really something to write home about, but it does work as a good contrast to how Quint is with Hooper. Because that, on the other hand, is a complete shit show. Something I didn't mention earlier is that Hooper happens to be a bit of a rich kid. He had a wealthy upbringing that got him through school, and it's something he continues to fall back on with his work. Now this isn't necessarily a bad thing, seeing how he uses it to do important stuff, but it's undeniable the guy had a leg up in life. Quint, on the other hand, is a middle-class working man. The kind who values hardship over privilege and thus doesn't particularly respect people like Hooper. Actually, that's an understatement, because by God, this has to be one of the most infamous feuds in movie history. From dirty looks to condescending quips to even just straight up vengeful rage, it is without question that these two hate each other. Partially because they actually did hate each other. Yes, another trouble plaguing this movie's production was the fact that Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw couldn't get along on set. Shaw apparently had a huge distaste for Dreyfuss's acting ability, which, along with the fact he had a bit of a drinking problem at the time, caused him to suddenly lash out at the guy. Now with how I'm going on about it, surely I must think this dynamic is very well done and consider it to fit perfectly within the framework of the movie. Yeah, here's a hot take for you. Despite the props this feud generally gets, and don't get me wrong, on its own it's pulled off pretty well, no short thanks to Shaw and Dreyfuss hating each other's guts, it kinda falls short in how it ties back into the shark. Which is to say, it really doesn't. To jump ahead a little bit, the first scene of them out at sea has Quint trying to fish up something big only for it to get away. All with him and Hooper arguing over whether or not it was the shark. This is the last you see of this dynamic for the rest of the movie. Not only is it very short-lived, making you wonder why even introduce it if you're just gonna cut it off so early, but it ends before a point that, if they just stuck to it for a little bit longer, they would have made way better use of it. In their first encounter with the shark is immediately priority number one. The closest you get of the two going at it is Quint yelling at Hooper to hurry up with some tag he's trying to grab. Now imagine for a second that if during this moment, Quint and Hooper still couldn't get along with that getting in the way of them dealing with the shark. Not only would the scene itself be more tense since it's less certain they're gonna come out of it unscathed, but this in turn would make the feud actually relevant to the plot as something they might need to work past if they hope to come out on top. Now to be fair, depending on how you look at it, this dynamic doesn't technically end here. There is that part near the end where Quint sets up a diving cage that Hooper brought on board, one that he made fun of before they left for sea. This turnaround happens after Quint's attempt to tow the shark in causes the boat's engines to break down, thus making him look to Hooper as a last resort. This is the closest the feud ever gets to what I'm talking about because it's clearly a form of them putting aside their differences to get rid of the shark. Even so, however, there's still this huge gap of time where the issue just isn't brought up. So instead of it being something that gets more focus earlier and this being the penultimate moment where things are resolved, we get something that feels like the writers forgot about it and were only able to work it back in at the last minute. I know I'm probably the odd one out here, but I do think this aspect of the film could have been done better. Anyway, the three get acquainted, some more so than others, as they gear up before finally heading out to sea. Now I'm gonna backtrack a bit. Remember what I said about that dock scene from earlier? Well, this first scene of them in the water kind of addresses what I was talking about there. I already mentioned how this is the last scene of Quint and Hooper going at it, which, along with the fact they come up short trying to catch something only for what they're looking for to show up a scene later, it kinda renders this moment pointless in the grand scheme of things. Like at most, all it does is add a bit of foreshadowing.
You screw around with these tanks and they're gonna blow up.
With that said, this scene does do one thing right that earlier one didn't, and that's focus on characters we actually know. Even if nothing here really amounts to much, it's still neat seeing Brody trying to learn the ropes, literally. And as for the feud, even if it is short-lived, it's still quite the sight to see while it lasts. Since I'm on this, I think I should make it clear that I still consider Quint to be a major strength holding up the second half. Just because I think his dynamic with another character could have used more work, that doesn't make him worthless. I think there's definitely still something to get out of him working off these two in just a general back and forth sense. And on his own, well, let's just say we'll get to that soon. Now to reiterate what I said already, Quint snags what he thinks is the shark only for it to get away. Despite this, it's only a scene later when the actual shark decides to show its face. Now, despite what I said about this moment being kind of a wasted opportunity on Quint and Hooper's part, I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad because of that. It's just a fun moment of them running around the boat as they try to tag the shark. And you know, I think now is a good time to bring up Spielberg's, let's say, ambitious choice of shooting location. Before Jaws, it was pretty rare for movies that took place in the ocean to actually be shot in the ocean. Outside of maybe stock footage, studios would usually opt into building a big tank to film stuff in. The problem is, though, is that this didn't always look very realistic when compared to 70% of the planet's surface. Spielberg, on the other hand, wanted his movie to look authentic, not really taking into account that movies might be shot in tanks for a reason. You see, the thing about nature is that it does not give a shit about the art of filmmaking. It's not going to keep your set still for when the cameras start rolling. It's not going to keep passers-by out of the shot as the ocean is one of the most open areas on Earth. It's not going to keep the water nice and heated for whenever someone falls in. It will do the exact opposite of that and hold back your production every step of the way. It was by all means the biggest thing holding it back, because while a giant animatronic might not be needed right away to get cameras rolling, and while two of your main actors fighting might not matter much if whoever they're playing are supposed to hate each other, there's really no making up for countless days of reshoots accumulating unusable footage. And that's on days you're able to film anything at all. It was so bad that Spielberg went from trailblazing this kind of idea to telling off other filmmakers who wanted to attempt the same thing. Now the reason I bring this up here is because while none of this might seem like a big deal when these guys are just sitting around, you definitely can't deny scenes like this weren't probably a nightmare to film. Not only are they shooting the boat from every which way, but if shots like these are anything to go by, these actors were probably putting themselves at some kind of risk being on here. In case you were wondering, yes, that risk did at times rear its ugly head. One particularly bad incident was when some planking was torn out as it was being towed, causing it to sink with the actors still on board. To be clear, I'm not talking about the prop boat at the end that was built to sink on command. I'm talking about the actual Orca that was driven all throughout the second half. I couldn't exactly find out how they got it back out of the water, but I know they must have because it was set afloat in the Hollywood backlot after production finished, where it stayed for years until it took on too much water damage, and instead of taking it out and displaying it somewhere else, the studio had the bright idea to chop it up for timber. Fuck you, Universal. Please don't strike this video. Okay, so I was on my way to work, and I found this thing.
Yeah, it's I mean,
yeah, the actual boat might be gone, but you know, at least there's this. Anyway, they managed to tag the shark before it's able to swim away. Sometime later, things settle down. The three men partake in an evening drink, and while it might seem a bit weird that Quint and Hooper are getting along here since nothing prompted it beforehand, I do need to emphasize they are drunk, so I think most people can buy it. Then things suddenly take a turn when Quint lets slip he was a survivor aboard the Indianapolis. Alright, so quick history lesson. The USS Indianapolis was the Navy ship used to transport the little boy, which you might know as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It wasn't long after the ship finished said transport when it was torpedoed by a Japanese sub, sinking it and stranding the survivors at sea for days on end. To make things worse, the wreckage attracted a bunch of sharks that began picking them off one by one. Now the reason I bring this up is because I did not know any of this when I first saw Jaws, and I think because of that I didn't really get the hype for this moment. That's right, Quint's speech, one of the most famous movie monologues of all time, just didn't do it for me. I mean, this thing has been referenced to death, and yet for me, it just felt a little too long, and, well, I said already that Quint could be hard to understand, so just try listening to him while Robert Shaw is actually drunk. Which, credit where credit's due, that is still pretty impressive he was able to memorize those lines. Other than that, though, I just didn't see what the hype was. That was until I found this stuff out, as well as the fact that I wasn't the only one who didn't know about it. When Jaws first came out, most people had never heard of the Indianapolis. The whole disaster was a military-kept secret for almost 30 years, which when you consider the time it happened and when this movie was being made, you might say a young hotshot director had an opportunity to shed some light on the subject. Now, I'm not saying Spielberg was a whistleblower, but he might as well have been. This scene was the first time the general public ever caught wind of this story, and as you can guess, the people who were actually there were blown away. By Quint's speech, that was a terrible choice of words. I mean, these guys had to keep their mouths shut for decades. A lot of them probably holding some kind of grudge when you consider why it took so long to rescue them. So for a mainstream movie to let it all out, that feeling of recognition must have been unfathomable. I've grown a much greater appreciation for this scene because of that, although, even in retrospect, this scene does have a bit going for it on its own. And I'm not just talking about the implication that Quint's living as a shark hunter might not just be a job for him. I'm talking about the fact that this is kind of the first moment where Quint gets to shine by himself. Don't get me wrong, Quint was great and all beforehand, but most of that time was focused on how he acted around Brody and Hooper. And yes, I know I said already that Quint works best when you stick him with these two, but it's not like you can't have a moment that's just about him. If anything, it's kind of welcome after you establish that dynamic as a baseline. And considering the other two are in the same room listening to him, it doesn't really stray too far from said baseline. Not long after Quint gives his speech does the sharks show back up, this time with a vengeance. It wrecks their boat a bit in a quick swim by, and despite briefly leaving them alone, it quickly comes back the next morning to finish the job. They briefly manage to get a hold of the thing, but as I said already, they try towing it in only for the boat's engines to break down, forcing Quint to resort to one of Hooper's methods. They set up the diving cage, Hooper equips himself with a poison-filled spear, and then he's slowly lowered into the water, ready to face the monster below. He drops it. Now I'm not gonna lie, this scene kind of used to piss me off. Hooper has a close call with the shark before immediately hiding under some rocks below. This was being built up like it was his big moment and then it just goes nowhere. With the guy being my favorite character and all, you can imagine how I felt about him being cast to the side like that. Then I found out that in the original script, Hooper was supposed to die. This was changed though after a stuntman had an actual near-death encounter with a shark. Yeah, despite the animatronics, some of these shots are of an actual shark they found off the coast of Australia. And while filming said shark, the guy standing in for Hooper had a heart attack underwater while the thing was attacking his diving cage. He escaped thankfully, but he was close to biting the dust. Because he didn't, however, Spielberg took it as a sign to let Hooper live. Now, granted, it probably still would have been nice if his character had more to do after this, but with how far they were into production, I can't imagine they had enough time for that substantial of a rewrite. And considering another character who isn't as lucky, I'm just glad Hooper gets to live, so I'll give it a pass. It's now down to Quint and Brody. As they look in horror of the broken cage, the shark leaps onto the boat, reaching for the two men and... Okay, I think it's about time I brought up the elephant in the room. I may have pointed out a few issues with this film already, some just pet peeves to be fair, but if there's one problem I know people have with Jaws, it's that the shark looks fake as hell. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about the movie without bringing up this fact. And for a film that spent so much time keeping it hidden, it is kind of a disappointment when you realize this is what you were waiting for. I'm gonna defend it. First off, let's not forget the fact that this thing did not work when production began. We should be thankful we got to see it on screen at all. I know keeping it hidden at first might have benefited the film in the long run, but I don't think it would have went over as well without some kind of reveal, and not a totally premature one. Second, as I just finished talking about, some of these shots are of an actual shark, so it's not like the thing looks fake 100% of the time. Finally though, when it comes to showing off the animatronic, it's usually in short bursts, far away or in murky water. It makes all the imperfections harder to notice as if it wasn't just a big rubber prop. Now to be fair, when people say the shark looks fake, they might just be talking about this scene on the boat, and yeah, it's definitely rough here. It's out of the water, it's close up, they hold onto it for way too long, and the way it flops around is so slow and robotic that you can practically hear gears turning. Even then though, I don't think it takes away from the scene that much. The thing still capsizes their boat and well, do you see how Quint goes out? I don't care how fake the shark looks, that pain still looks very real. I don't know, I just never really saw this as an issue. I think this thing deserves more credit. Anyway, from here on out, it's pretty simple to explain. Quint bites the dust, leaving Brody to take on the shark by himself. He manages to lodge an oxygen tank in its mouth and with one perfect shot, blows it to Kingdom Come. With the shark finally done for, Hooper reemerges and he and Brody paddle back to shore. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Jaws. Now, at the risk of sounding preachy, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that felt kind of guilty for liking this movie. I think most people these days realize that sharks aren't as bad as the media has made them out to be. At least not great whites like the one in this movie. Not to say they're exactly safe, I mean attacks do happen, but even the slightest bit of research will tell you that moments like that are rare, at least when you're not messing around with them. It kinda makes me inclined to believe they were trying to provoke the one they found during production. I mean, hell, the film is so out of touch with reality that Spielberg himself kind of regretted making it, fearing it helped fuel the declining shark population. Now, while the exact effect Jaws had on these kinds of issues is debated, some point to how it kicked over fishing into high gear, some point to how it ironically spawned a generation of enthusiasts who contribute to conservation efforts, some point to both, but no matter which side you lie on, it's hard to argue that Jaws isn't somewhat in bad taste. Even taking all of that into consideration though, damn it, I just can't hate this movie. There's just so much about it that's too good for me to simply wave it away. From the story and characters themselves to the troubled production and how remarkable it is they were able to pull it off, to even just some sentimental value of it being one of the first films to tell me, hey, there might be a bit more to watch than whatever Marvel's pushing out. A sentiment that became all the more relevant years to come. Frankly, I don't care what reality says. A good movie is still a good movie. And Jaws is a damn good movie. Besides, it's not like I'm contributing to the problem. I doubt our fine scaly friends here would hold a grudge. Oh shit.
The amateur marine biologist has learned the first rule of the sea. When traveling into shark-infested waters, always bring a bigger boat.